What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Early read, week 10, best bet show. Guest I've been trying to get on for a while, a little tricky to pin down, but we made sure we got him on the show. A special Wednesday guest. I welcome to the show Jon Fendler, at Jon Fendler on Twitter, at JAF373 on his betstamp. One of the sharper minds in the college sports space, both college football and college basketball. Respected mind. I've learned a lot from him. His random Twitter posts about things that really maybe catch a few people's eye, definitely caught my eye. So I'm happy to have him on the show. Jon, thanks for coming on. How's it going?
I'm doing well. It's a relief to know that somebody actually cares about all the ridiculous stuff that I post that seemingly has very little to do with anything. But yeah, I've been very flaky. You've asked me a bunch of times. I've beaten around the bush and whatnot. So you finally got me. Hope it's worth it.
Yeah, no, I very excited for the show. Big college football week here. We're now in November, so quickly it turns from these teams are starting. We're starting to figure these teams out, and we're starting to learn a little bit more, especially in this era where it feels like before you know it, the teams don't exist anymore. It's a totally new team next year. We're already into like college football playoff conversation and all these big games. So, Jon, I know you're an avid college basketball bettor. So before we even get into the games or anything, I am curious how you view. We're recording this on October 30th. College basketball starts next week for you. I know as an avid bettor, how do you view a market this late in the season? Do you find that edges are kind of drying up? Do you feel that you still feel like there's meat off the bone, especially in this era of college football? I know kind of an ambiguous question, but I know because you start to focus on other things, how do you view college football at this time of year?
Well, last week was the first week where I looked at the board Sunday night and said, oh shit, like this is pretty sharp. I was looking, I ran my numbers Sunday night and said, it's getting tougher and tougher. But I don't get the sense that it's that happened any earlier this year than it has in the past. I mean, I think it's pretty much in line with how it's been. But the big difference for me, as you said, is because teams are turning over rosters during the offseason, I've been very aggressive this year in getting rid of my preseason priors really quickly, like as quickly as I possibly can, saying, you know what, we have two data points at this point. F it. Like I was just wrong about this team in the preseason. So I've been really trying to be diligent about that. And it feels like the season just started, but like a lot of these teams have played 65, 70, 75% of their games already. Like they kind of are what they are. So yeah. That's kind of the shocking thing for me that gets me every year in football as opposed to basketball, where, you have 30 plus games. You watch a team 6-7 times, you're like, all right, they can get better, they can get worse. Football, it's so short. That's probably the biggest difference for me.
Yeah, something I've definitely learned is like preseason, I'm a big win totals better, big futures better. I think you need to start looking more at outlier cases, at different types of ways to play on these teams that might have some more, like the tails seem higher. They're maybe not as, for lack of a better word, taily than, or their tails are heightened rather than what it used to be in college football, where these teams were the same 3 or 4 years in a row. So I think that's something I've learned. And I would say something else, and you hit on it, kind of ditching the priors. And, I like to slowly move out of my priors as the season goes on. And I've realized this year now that, it gets to the midseason point and I'm starting to see that my numbers are closer to market. I'm starting to see that I'm also a few that are off market. I'm plucking a few more winners off the board because I'm starting to see that maybe the market hasn't caught up to this case. Maybe I need to. What were you going to say there?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it, because there are teams like a Vandy or an Indiana, for example, who it was pretty apparent, a week or two in, like these are just completely different teams, new coaches, new schemes, totally new rosters. Whatever data you were working off of from last year and these models, the S&P pluses and all those, whatever they were working off of was completely useless.
Yeah,
a week into the season. So I've also generally been a very slow adjuster. I've tried to say, all right, I think I had a good read preseason, like the first couple games, how much can we really put into those? But it's a totally different ballgame now in the portal era.
Yeah, I think you need to lean into the variance a little bit more. And obviously, look, we're about to talk week 10 games. So what we're about to say may not apply to this, but I do think big picture, as I go into my offseason prep, it's something I've really taken from this season is like, yes, it's different. I think I knew that going into it, but now there might be bigger edges to be had attacking, like my first preview podcast with the Big Ten preview. And so I do them alphabetically. Indiana was the first team I said, I'm really high on this team. I think they're going to be really good. So my first win total bet on this show was Indiana over 5 wins. I didn't talk playoff. I didn't talk over 7.5, 8.5, if those were even available. This year or next year, I may be a little bit more willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, like, I don't know, what's the first, Indiana next year. That team. Screw them making a bowl. I think they're actually going to win 9, 10 games. There's that much upside with this type of roster.
And I've never gotten involved with it, but I know there is a market out there for like alt win totals. You know, the one that's painted, you know, minus 110, 6.5, but you can also bet over 8.5 at some, you know, plus 2 something or whatever it is. So that's something that maybe is worth exploring next year, at least for me, because as you said, the range of outcomes is just so much wider than I can ever remember it being.
And I think you could also look at like both ways. Some of these transfer laden teams where like maybe it clicks, maybe it doesn't. And I don't know if this is the most plus EV and I'm throwing something out there, but like play both outcomes where, all right, you got a team that has a win total of 5.5, play over 7.5 and play under 3.5 because there's a chance they suck and there's a chance that they're really good.
I mean, I think it's viable. I mean, I wouldn't have said that 3 to 5 years ago, but I think now, and same thing with some early in the season, some individual games, whereas in the past I'd say, all right, I feel pretty good about whatever my number is. Now I say, man, this team could be really good or this team could suck. So if the line is 7, why not lay 14 on an alt and then take the dog on the money line? You know, those types, there is a way to maybe finagle that where you're betting 2 of the more extreme outcomes because you just don't know what this team is early in the season.
100%. All right, great chat there. Let's talk some injury news. And I think we could play into some of that, like talking the game in general, but obviously the biggest game of the week is Penn State, Ohio State. Mentioned it on the early week episode. We don't know about Drew Aller. We're recording this Wednesday night. He practiced today. There was a video of him practicing. It seems like trending towards going. I don't know. I feel like James Franklin is definitely on the more gamesmanship type side of things than anything, but it did, watching the video, sitting from my chair here in my apartment in New York City, it did seem like he was okay and willing to play or capable of playing. We'll see. On the Ohio State side, Zen Mikaliski, the second offensive lineman now for Ohio State that went down with an injury. It seems Ryan Day said something along the lines of like, doesn't look like he's going to play. He was also carted off the field. So I was leaning towards he was going to be out anyway, but Ryan Day showed a little bit more to his hand there. So John, obviously the biggest game on the board. Doesn't mean you have to have a bet or anything like that, but what are your thoughts on this game? Because I think the injury news is obviously going to drive the betting action, but I do think that, and I mentioned this, I won't get into my handicap again, but I really think, obviously Aller is starting quarterback, but this is obviously an impactful game, and this can go in a lot of different directions, and I think health is really going to play a factor in that.
I was going to say, off the top of my head, if I could name maybe the 3 most bullshitty coaches as far as injuries, Franklin's there, Pat Narduzzi, and of course Kyle Whittingham. I think those might be the big 3.
No, Kyle Whittingham has graduated with this Cam Rising thing. This is like he is in the Hall of Fame.
So yeah, I don't believe anything from any of those guys. But yeah, this line I think is really sharp. As you'd expect in a late season, the biggest game of the week, you would expect that line to be pretty sharp. So I don't have much there. I kind of hoped, and maybe it'll change later in the week if Aller is confirmed in, kind of like the under, but already moved way down. I think open maybe 48-ish down to 45. 45 is a really important number. Mm-hmm. If that got up into like the 47 range again, I think I'd have some interest in the under. This is one, both defenses match up pretty well. Sidewise, I don't know if this narrative is out there. I haven't really listened to anything this week, but generally speaking, the narrative on Franklin is that he just can't get the team up for the really big ones. And I don't know if the data bears that out. Anecdotally, it probably does. I mean, that narrative came from somewhere. But I do wonder if that narrative will keep this line above 3, even if Aller is announced in. Because I think if this dips below 3, I think you would see a good amount of Ohio State money at that point.
Yeah. 3 weeks ago, I would have told you I'm probably going to take Penn State in the points because I just think that I wasn't as high on Ohio State maybe. And I think that maybe these 2 teams in particular are a little bit closer. But the blend of now Aller banged up and Ohio State kind of sleepwalking and dragging ass through the Nebraska game on top of the loss to Oregon, it feels like like everyone loves Penn State. You know, and again, that's narrative and it doesn't mean it's noise, but it feels like I'm not getting a great Penn State number to take the home dog. Like I would have liked 4.5 or something like that. Whereas now pushing 3, maybe if Aller's in.
Yeah, and it kills me to say something like this because I generally don't think it matters that much. But the fact that this game is a noon kick as opposed to the big 8 p.m. whiteout type thing, I've been to a few of those Penn State whiteout games. Like it is a totally different ball game. The noon crowd it's Penn State. It's still going to be a great crowd. It just doesn't have the same holy shit level punch to it.
And it's weird because if Aller was healthy, I would kind of like the over. Obviously, it's dipped down because we've seen Penn State open up the playbook a little bit when there's been scoreboard pressure. Obviously, they haven't faced a defense like Ohio State. Just with Aller not healthy now, and if it is like a mix of Aller and Prbula, I just don't see how this isn't like really nip and tuck, neither team really doing anything. Because, and I mentioned this earlier in the week, a few weeks ago, Oregon, Ohio State, Ryan Day, for as much as you want to shit on Ryan Day, he did coach an aggressive game. He matched Dan Lanning in terms of, okay, we're going to go for it on 4th and short. We're going to try and keep possession of the ball as opposed to punting it. I don't know if that's going to be this game plan. Maybe it's quarterback driven, but I am curious how that goes. Like, I guess if I had to make a bet, it would probably be more first half under than anything, but kind of late to the party on that. So it's honestly a game I'm really interested to see, and I'm probably going to end up on the sidelines.
I've been surprised just because I just respect the hell out of Andy Kotelnicki over the years. And I thought that this offense would finally, after all these years, have an explosive element. They're still outside the top 100 despite playing like an okay schedule.
Yeah,
outside the top 100 in explosiveness. It just hasn't been there. I don't know if it's Aller just being still kind of limited as far as some of the throws he can make or what, but something has not fully clicked. Maybe next year, but I don't know. I had higher expectations for this offense, and it just, as you said, there's been glimpses of it at times, and maybe if Ohio State gets up early, they'll have no choice. But I don't know. I'm still skeptical.
Yeah, and I mean, on the Ohio State side, now down to 2 offensive linemen, I still think Penn State secondary is probably its weak point. Hasn't been tested all that much. I've tried to find some ways to fade it, and it hasn't gone my way. This Ohio State team still wants to run to pass. They don't. Will Howard, I think, is fine, and they obviously have the easy buttons on the outside like Jeremiah Smith and everything. But this team still is based around its run game with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. You're running into that teeth of the Penn State defense. It does seem like maybe this is a really buttoned up early start where neither team wants to shoot the first bow across the arrow.
I could see that. If I still did first half bets, which I don't, because it kills me to have the variance. You already have a high variance sport over 60 minutes, and then to narrow that variance down to 30 minutes. I've gotten burned so many times that I get sometimes like this, the angle makes sense, but I've just written them off at this point.
That's fine. We can move on though. Friday night, this is just injury news in general, but I don't know if we have to go too deep on it, but South Florida, Florida Atlantic, the battle for South Beach or the middle of Florida. Byron Brown still questionable out of the bye week. I saw he was on crutches in the team's last game. Bryce Archie. South Florida's offense kind of came together. Brown, apparently a game time call. I'd probably lean more towards him being out, but that's some injury news. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, John, as I just ramble through some random quarterback updates. Cam Fancher's tracking to play.
Yeah, USF is always so hard, at least for me to get a handle on, because you'll have just 4 straight series where they go 3 and out. Each drive takes 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And then they just hit a bunch of explosives in a row. They're a tough team just because their variance is so high from game to game. But yeah, without him, they lose so much of that element. I can't see myself, whether he's in or not. I don't think he'll be involved here. Were they off last week? They were, right?
USF? Yeah. USF was off last week. So if it is Archie, he gets another week of practice and everything like that. Maybe they come in with a little bit more of a sound game plan. South Florida, it's honest. I've seen 3s pop and then it gets bet right back down. So 2.5 totals way down to 49.
Yeah. 49 in the USF game, kind of made me do a double take.
Yeah.
If he's announced in, where does that total go? I mean, it's going to go above 51, you would think.
Yes. Brown hasn't been as great as many had hoped. And this was a team, South Florida, that I faded preseason. I took their under win total. I need one more loss there. So I guess this would be a good time to get it. But tough schedule. So I do think South Florida, obviously, if Brown was fully healthy, maybe they could be sitting on a big performance. And I mean, you look, they played Miami, they played Alabama, they played Tulane already. So they've had a tough go of it. I still think that this team had way too high of expectations going into the year. That being said, FAU is hot garbage.
Yep. Agreed. What I could kind of see here is USF's run D is pretty good. They're 10th in line yards. So you could see FAU getting behind the chains, but then FAU has some explosiveness with Fancher. Like, he's a knucklehead. He does stupid shit, but he does have a lot of pop to his game. They're 30th in explosiveness, and USF gives up a ton of big plays. So you could see a bunch of like 3rd and 12 chunk plays down the field for FAU, but with a lot of nothing in between.
Oh, yeah. Definitely boom or bust.
Yeah.
Another one, Bracial Tuden, tugboat for Va Tech 2 weeks ago, ran for like 300 yards against Boston College on Thursday night. Wasn't a boot after the Georgia Tech game. Now back at practice. So I guess he's tracking towards playing. Syracuse, obviously off of one of the worst performances you'll ever see from Kyle McCord. As someone who had the over in the game, that's a new one to have 3 defensive scores and not get over the total. But I haven't made a play on this game, but I kind of like Syracuse, even though it feels like Va Tech turned a corner. Cuse in the role of underdog, I actually think this number's a bit much. I think Va Tech didn't necessarily put a good performance out there against a Georgia Tech team with no offense to show for it last week. Any thoughts there on Va Tech Cuse?
I don't think I bet a Va Tech game yet this year. I just don't think I knew in the preseason that I had some skepticism because they were popping so much in like all the returning production models. They were like top 3 in every returning production metric. And I was just not sold on that. But at the same time, I haven't found, obviously, I think I regret not playing Vandy week 1, obviously. But I really haven't found much of an edge either way with them. Syracuse, the lack of a run game kind of bothers me. They're, 120 something in rush offense. Campus to Canton, this great site that I found this year, measures pass rate over expectation, which is an NFL stat, but they have it for college. And Cuse is number 1 in pass rate over expectation. So even when you think they're running the ball, they're still throwing it. Does that one-dimensional nature make it too easy for Va Tech, who is a good secondary? I guess that's my concern. If this moved off of 3 in either direction, I might be more interested. Is it still 3?
No, it's 4.
4? Okay. I didn't see that. Yeah, Houston, at 4, I think I have a little more Cuse interest.
Yeah, Cuse to me, it's the kind. First of all, they're a glorified air raid team. That's what they are. People have. I feel like Kyle McCord's a super polarizing guy, but I don't know. I think for Cuse especially, it's a program going like pretty much nowhere. New coach. I think they've actually kind of hit something here. They got good receivers, Pena, Gadsden. Like, to me, and I took Cuse in my underdog round robin, leaning into that variance. Obviously, egg on my face immediately, but it's the type of team that plays up and down to its competition. Like him as a dog, don't like him as a favorite. Like, I do think that, I don't know, Va Tech also not a team I necessarily trust as a favorite. I don't think Jerome's is very good at all. But that was another one. And then one of the sneaky bigger games, John, I'm curious your thoughts on this because we didn't talk about it earlier in the week. But so right before we recorded, Pat Narduzzi said Eli Holstein is going to be good to go. He's on the gamesmanship list, so we'll see if he's telling the truth. But we got the Pete Thamel tweet telling us that Holstein's trending towards in. He left the Cuse game late in the game with an injury. Looked like a concussion to me. Kevin Jennings, who, I don't know if you saw this, John, but went like full catatonic on the field against Duke, had 3 turnovers in the fourth quarter. SMU still wins. Big game between 2 undefeated ACC teams. Both quarterbacks, it seems like I would now call them on the better side of questionable, probably closer to probable than questionable, just my own kind of reading between the leaves. But yeah, what are your thoughts on both these teams? 2 teams that are in the ACC mix, but I don't think are viewed really in it. It seems like it's a Miami-Clemson collision course. Yeah,
I've been a quiet SMU fan for most of the year because I played them to win the ACC, I think like 12-1 after the Nevada.
Hell yeah, you did. I'm in that. I bet them preseason. How sad do you think I felt after the Nevada game?
Yeah. So I remember thinking like, man, Nevada's a lot better than we thought. And SMU just has these egg games occasionally. But yeah, it's going to suck if they run the table and they still don't, get to the title game. But for this week, I made this one like 5.5. So assuming that the line stays roughly where it is, around 7, both QBs are in. The only thing that would interest me here is potentially Pitt as like a long shot money line in a round robin, because both teams play fast. Pitt extremely fast. I think they're both top 11 in pace, situation adjusted pace. So when the game is relatively close, both teams are playing really fast. Both are outside the top 100 in explosive rate allowed. So you should see a ton of chunk plays. I would have some interest here that Pitt just wins the high variance battle. And, if that money line is something like, 220, 225, something like that, I wouldn't mind including that.
Yeah, I can't get there because of the pace and, like you mentioned, some of the big plays, but I am concerned that Pitt's offense is really propped up on playing a bunch of shitty defenses. If you just go through who they've played, Pitt's played one team inside the top 50 in EPA per play on defense, and that was Cal. Cal only allowed 17. That was at Pitt at what is it? Whatever Heinz Field is now called, some sponsor. But I'm a little concerned that this Pitt offense is. I know they bring in a new offensive coordinator from Western Carolina. They're playing fast and it's exciting. Holstein's dynamic. Desmond Reed's really good at running back. Their running back. I'm a little concerned that this offense, though, they're going to play an SMU team that might just be the best defense they face, and it kind of falls flat on their face. That's my kind of fear, but I agree leaning into the variance with two teams that are pacey and are prone to busted coverages on the back end, especially Pitt.
Yeah, and SMU sometimes falls into these games where they're going really fast, but they're not really going anywhere. They'll run like a ton of tempo, but they'll just run into the teeth of the D line, and then it's 4th and 7, and they punt, and it's 40 seconds later. So
yeah,
I do wonder if you get a lot of that too. Pitt is 8th in defensive line yards. SMU's 13th. So I think you could see some pretty quick 3-and-outs for both sides.
Yeah, and
it's a game I'd have to look and see this. Maybe it's a game where special teams has some impact here too. It's not something I look at a ton, but for a game like this, you could see some short fields. SMU, that would interest me if I could find that.
Yeah, both Pitt 40. This is PFF special teams. Yeah. Pitt 48th, SMU 71st.
Okay, so not too big of a gap.
Yeah, nothing too huge there. If there's a huge mismatch, though, it does matter. I've brought that up on the show a few times before. I also think it's funny. Pitt was like 110th or something in EPA per pass, and because of the Cuse game, they're now like at the national average because they gained however many, whatever percentage points just by rattling off 3 pick sixes on Kyle McCord. I do think that's an interesting game. As someone with SMU futures, I like SMU. You can't lay it though. Like this is like, I feel like, and we could talk about some of these other games, but like Indiana, Michigan State, SMU, Pitt, South Carolina, A&M, the quote unquote spots, the odds makers, whatever you want to call them, whoever sets the lines, they also know about the spot now. It's not, and it's the same thing. I know you're a college basketball bettor, so it's something I've noticed as well. Like the ones you circle on like Wednesday, like, oh, this team is going here on Saturday. Like, no way they're following this up. So do the odds makers. It's all sussed out. So SMU, you're laying over a touchdown. I think 5 years ago, this line's 3, 2.5, even something like that. And now you're paying such a crazy premium to back some of these teams in like the obvious quote unquote spots.
I have been ranting about this for like at least the last year, and
listen. I host the podcast. I know who my guest is. I got to play I got to play here.
You are playing the hits. You really know. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I used to be a totally situational capper, if you want to call it that, for years and years. That's basically how I cap games, and there was an edge there to be had years ago. But yeah, you're right. Everything is so shaded now, and a lot of it is just, I don't know. It's just kind of a narrative type thing at this point, but college basketball really got bad last year.
Last year was impossible relative for like the spots.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm like a reformed, obnoxious smoker, like the guy who stopped smoking. And now he's like, how could you possibly smoke? Like, how could you play that spot? But yeah, I agree. It would have been maybe 3 or 4 a couple years ago.
Yeah. And I bet, and I think that again, we're saying spots like it's derogatory, but like it's just an easy blanket term.
Mhm.
But I do think some of these situational factors do play a role in certain situations, and it's part of the handicap. But when you look and it's like, all right, well, Pitt, they're undefeated plus whatever in turnovers, that's great. But you go to the line, like you can only the number needs to match the situation that makes up for it. You know what I mean? You can't just blindly bet these spots because you're paying such a tax to get them.
Right. And I'm sure most of the audience knows this, but football power rankings are based purely off of like per play data. So the turnover stuff is already kind of filtered out. So, BYU, for example, I used this as an example last week in something I tweeted. BYU isn't really inflated at all because all their turnover luck is not really included in the line anyway. So their per play stuff, I have them around 15th without any of the turnover shit included. They're still a really good team, but like every week, not Oklahoma State, but last week, like crazy UCF money, just kind of due to this perception that BYU was overrated. But is there going to be regression there for a team like BYU? Of course, but regression could be a steady drip over a couple of weeks, or it could just be an avalanche all at once. You just don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I would say, like you mentioned that steady drip, it's, well, if BYU's laying 6-7 points all of a sudden at home, maybe they're not covering big spreads. But when you close a 3-point dog against a UCF team that, for all intents and purposes, is terrible, they were on quarterback 4 to end that game.
Right.
You're getting almost like a discount, and playing it at post almost. You're letting that just build up, and then you just play back against it. I do think there's something to be had there. And then maybe it comes all at once, and it's like, oh, well, I still think in certain cases you could get a valuable number just doing that.
You could. It's interesting. I guess one of the other big differences with college football is because there's an entire week where narratives can build. Sometimes there's like an inertia that builds up, and like a narrative kind of gets laundered into the tachosphere, and it just takes on a life of its own. And I kind of saw that with UCF last week. Like it just kept going and going, and it's like a self-perpetuating thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to. My other favorite one, and I feel like I've been on the wrong side of this one, like for like my whole life, but like when the quarterback gets ruled out and you get a really good number, and then the backup turns into Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and it's like, oh well, you get a great number. And sometimes, especially in college football, you're not even losing. I sometimes not even bet like a surprise ruled out to injury, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Like I really got something good here, and it's like, you lose the original bet, not just the closing number that moves a touchdown. You're just like, oh, well, that's terrible. So I guess I could swing this into Indiana, Michigan State, kind of a team we've kind of been tangenting about some of these big picture macro ideas, but Indiana Sparty, Indiana 7.5 point favorite, paying across the board, 51.5 is the total. I've been championing Indiana this entire season. I really like them. I've now found myself starting to go against them because I just feel like beneath the surface, there might be some, like you're mentioning, natural regression. Like I played Washington money line last week as maybe the backup. Indiana's a little too inflated now. I had circled, I wanted to bet Michigan State. And as we were just talking about, I don't think Michigan State should be plus 7.5 though. I don't think like this number is adding in a lot of tax or whatever you want to call it, in my opinion, on the Michigan State side to back the trendy home underdog against an undefeated Indiana.
Yeah, with Rourke included, I made this like 11.5. So I think last week the general perception was that maybe he was worth like 3.5, something like that. The drop off to Jackson, and that's probably right. Realistically, somewhere in that 3 to 4 range. But Michigan State, I haven't really gotten involved with them a whole lot. I did play the over against Iowa a couple weeks ago. I think that's the only time I really played them in the last like month or so. There's some really good Jonathan Smith underdog trends that have built up over the years. But it's a team that I still, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. Indiana forces so many. That's such a havoc-minded defense. Like they'll give up some first downs, but when they need to, they're going to make a play. And it's just hard to get in front of that type of team when you're playing an offense with a quarterback who's such a disaster at times. It's kind of like over the years when I faded Iowa, I'm like, all right, there's no way Iowa can cover this number. And they won't cover the number until they return a punt for a touchdown or a sack or a safety. And Indiana kind of has that to them at times.
Yeah, but Iowa in a way, but not in terms of the anemic on offense. But
no. I mean, the defense just making like a timely play that, the defensive numbers don't look that great, but they've kind of stepped up when they've had to. I agree that I think in the past I would have said, yeah, there's going to be a ton of regression with Indiana. They can't keep doing this, but it's still, even if Rourke is out, I still think this, like you said, is a little bit short. But if he's actually confirmed out,
he's
right
gonna
now
play.
it's right.
He's going to play. They're optimistic he's going to play. I think he's going to play.
If he's ruled out, because this line seems to be straddling the will he or won't he. It's going to go below 7. It's going to go to what, 6, 6.5?
Yeah, probably. There was game day steam on Washington. It closed.
Right.
I want to say they closed like 5.5, something like that.
So you should. I mean, I would be, if this went down. He's announced out. This goes down to 6-ish. I would play Indiana at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Sparty was a 7-point dog at home against Iowa 2 weeks ago. They won, full credit to them. But in between, they lose to Michigan on the road. I don't know. It seems like a big update, a big upgrade. Aiden Childs, again, to me, this is like another maybe underdog round robin type idea because Childs 9 big time throws, 22 turnover worthy plays, which is kind of insane. But there's no doubt that he's a high talented player. You could maybe lean into that and you get the good Aiden Childs and you get maybe some Indiana on the road. Maybe it doesn't come together. Or Rourke is maybe even a downgrade. He came back too fast. Then maybe you have a live dog on the road. I mean, Indiana hasn't trailed all season, which I still think is insane. And is part of why I'm starting to have the eye of maybe it's time to fade this team rather than keep playing them. That's something I did early in the season.
I would be really, as much as I also, share your Indiana love, I would be very open to this if the line was 10. But it's
exactly.
It's so hard to rationalize, essentially making this leap of faith that, okay, this is the week where they're just going to play way worse than they have so far. And if you're paying the premium for that, then there's really no point. It's hard to conceptualize for me.
Yeah, and then those were pretty much all the injury notes I had. I kind of weaved in some of that stuff, but we could kind of go get a few words on a few games, maybe make an underdog round robin. Anything jump out to you, John, you wanted to bounce off for the listeners?
Yeah, before we get to a couple of the dogs, one game that I imagine, I feel like I'm a little behind this week as far as catching up on some of the narrative stuff, but the Minnesota-Illinois game has to be getting some attention, right? The unranked road favorite. Which is
that's a classic one. That's a classic big buzzy big media term.
First time this year, and then there was only one last year. I think it was Kansas State, and then there was one in 2022. Oddly enough, was also Minnesota Illinois. Same type of thing. Minnesota unranked road favorite. Oddly enough, but yeah, I laid the 2 with Minnesota. Probably would have laid 2.5 or a really cheap 3. I could not be lower on Illinois. I have them 65th or something. I just can't even get close with them. What do you think?
I like Illinois because I think the passing game is better than it's getting credit for. I bet the over in the game. So you go back a year ago, these two teams played. And Illinois was dog shit last year. Minnesota was also dog shit. They had the Greek rifle at quarterback. Total close 44.5. I played 44.5. It's 45. So key number 45, but essentially the same number. I can't get there. I'm way higher. I've been kind of skewed towards Illinois overs to begin with because I think the defense has some serious issues. But I think Minnesota's defense is also being propped up by a pretty easy strength of schedule. And the real one to me that I've noticed is their coverage grade by PFF and just their secondary in general. If you look at who they've played, they haven't played a legitimate passing game, and they played USC, but there's some context in it because it was 30-mile-an-hour gusts that day, and they couldn't throw the ball, USC. So that's why it looks like the coverage numbers are really good, but this is what, I'm obsessive over this, and obviously whatever, but so I've been looking at Minnesota overs, and my bet regret of last week was not playing Maryland, Minnesota over, which flew. So maybe, I'm FOMO trying to catch that again, but the number hasn't really moved that much on Minnesota's totals here. It's still in the mid 40s. Now it's at 3. So I definitely am not in, but Minnesota should be able to run at will here with Taylor, and Brosmer looks like he finally has this offense moving. So low total, I could definitely see Minnesota. What do I make it? I'm pick. So 3, I'm inclined. I already bet the over. So that's kind of my take on this game. But I don't hate the Minnesota love because I do think Illinois could be trending in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So I know they took some big time shots last week in that Oregon game. I know Altmaier was in at the end of the game, was kind of getting beat up. I wondered if there was any residual from that. And then is Pat Bryant playing, or is that still up in the air?
Bert said concussion protocol, but he's gonna he's on, it's 5 days. He's on track to play, not a problem. Which again, who knows?
Yeah, sure.
But that was my look on the game. I don't hate the Minnesota look at all because it does look like this team is trending up. But I do your point about the residual hits, but you could make an argument though that the two teams have played like a pretty stark difference in terms of strength of schedule, with Illinois playing the likes of Penn State and Oregon.
Yeah, it's been soft for Minnesota. I kind of wrote them off initially because I was high on the offense bringing in Brosmer, who put up crazy numbers at New Hampshire. And then I don't watch as much as I used to, but I did catch a lot of that opener against UNC, and they were a disaster.
That was terrible.
Awful. I was like, man, what am I thinking? This is still Minnesota. They can't throw a forward pass. Like, stop. This is ridiculous. And then it turns out he actually has been pretty good.
Yeah,
so that was an overreaction on my part.
I could see Minnesota definitely winning. I mean, 2, essentially win the game, but I just think points. I'm not as high on both defenses. I'm higher on both offenses, so that's a pretty easy over, especially like a total this low. You really don't need much to get. Obviously, pace isn't going to help, but you hit one explosive, you're off to the races there where you really get something. So that was my look. Another Big Ten battle, new Big Ten battle, Washington USC. What do you think about that one?
Trying to see what I made this. I know USC's defense is just ravaged by injuries right now. I had USC -1 or so. I'm not going to play this, barring something like a huge move, which I don't think there's going to be. This line's pretty much stayed 2.5, 3, right, since it opened. Yeah,
I took the 3 with Washington, and so my issue with Washington is, and someone asked me, like watching Indiana, Washington, like, what's the deal with Washington? Like, how are they this year? 'Cause they knew that they lost everybody from the national championship team, and I was like, good team, talented. They look good, but they make a lot of stupid mistakes. Like they just penalties, special teams, everything that drives you insane. They make a lot of mistakes, and they watch the game. They're like, you nailed it. They make a lot of mistakes. Again, like maybe this is the spot driven stuff, but you go through USC schedule, they're on the back end of like as miserable of a scheduling run here, which I think scheduling spots per se, I do think this has some more credence, especially in these cross-country type teams. Like you've seen these Big Ten teams just really struggle to get off the mat in some of these situations. But USC, since their last bye week in week 2, they had a bye in week 3, sorry. They went at Michigan, home Wisconsin, at Minnesota, home Penn State, at Maryland, home Rutgers on a Friday, I guess. And now you're at Washington. Whereas Washington, they're at their bye at Indiana. Now you're back home. USC's been banged up. Maybe they get a little bit healthier, but I think I make Washington a small favorite in this game. So I took the 3. I don't necessarily trust USC. The offensive line has been brutal all year. I think Washington can bully ball this team, run, decept the pass. I don't think USC's defense is all that great. And if you really want to get like deep in the weeds, if it matters, if it doesn't matter, last year, Jed Fish, Arizona, took USC to the absolute limit. Should have probably beat them in overtime. They lose. Caleb Williams makes some crazy plays in that one. And that Arizona team was up 17-0. I think, again, maybe I'm overthinking it and that's like not actually relevant at all. But I don't know. I think this game should be closer to a pick. Maybe Washington small favorite. So I took the 3.
Yeah, I think gun to head, I would be on your side. Maybe this is one, this is kind of a low, like a cheaper money line for the round robin. Washington plus maybe 120, 125, something like that. But yeah, this game should set up. Both teams are very pass heavy. USC 7th in pass above expectation. Washington's 21st, but they're both kind of slow. Washington's 100th in pace. Neither team has any explosiveness, which kind of shocked me with USC, but it's just a lot of dink and dunk down the field. So they both should move it pretty efficiently. But yeah, I agree. Washington should, just based on the per play stuff, they should be better than they've shown. It's probably those hidden penalty yards and just the dumb shit, putting themselves behind the chains and whatnot, extending drives, when they're on defense by giving the offense free first downs, all that stuff. So I think Washington would be on my list for the round robin.
Yeah, my running theory is that Washington sold their soul for last year's team. Like just all the voodoo you could conjure up that doesn't make any sense. They sold it all to go to the Natty last year.
Yeah, it's funny how often that works. And, I think Fish has done a pretty good job considering what he had to total roster flip. But yeah, there is some element to that. Just curious though, because USC switched defensive coordinators to Lynn, and his whole priority seems to be limiting explosives, which they've done really well, as has Washington. Is maybe the more relevant comparison. I don't know if they even played last year, but did Arizona play UCLA?
Let's see.
Yeah,
I honestly didn't even think about that. Probably should have. Let's see. Arizona, UCLA. They
did in November.
Yeah, Arizona 27-10. Arizona kind of destroyed them.
I was going to say, I'm looking at the box. Yeah, Fafita went nuts.
Which this Arizona team or this Washington team does have a lot of Arizona qualities about it. Yeah. A lot of low ADOT throws. They obviously don't have a Tet McMillan, but they have, it's a similar structure to last year's team. I mean, look at what happened to Arizona this year, team that fell off a fucking cliff. So, I don't know. We'll see. I took the 3 with Washington. I see a lot of talk now that like USC probably a little bit better than their record states. I don't know if I buy that just with the injuries, and I don't know if Moss is all that good. The offensive line hasn't been great. I don't know if I buy that all too much, but going on the road, I do think Washington, this is a game they can win outright. Obviously, I took the 3. Another one, maybe I'm looking at the home dog, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, John. Arkansas, Ole Miss.
So,
Ole Miss, yeah.
What's the deal with Trey Harris? Anything concrete on him yet or no?
SEC injury report just came out as we're recording, so there's a kind of a flood of, fake status quotes. But I did see while we were talking on my Twitter, Trey Harris questionable for this game. They play Georgia next week, I think, right? Yeah, it's Georgia next week. So, are you going to play him and risk him or do you keep him on a snap count?
This is a tough one. I've played Arkansas in a couple of my underdog round robins this year, just because Taylor Green is such a dice roll. I think he actually fits kind of like we were talking about before with Childs, where he's just a hurricane at times, and he's going to make some crazy throws. He's going to make some big mistakes. So if you get the good version, I can see it. But this Ole Miss defense every week, I'm like, man, this is a different beast. It's just so surprising for a Lane defense, but they really are real.
Under machine Lane Kiffin. Who would have thought? I mean, they've had offensive line injuries, and now I'm pulling up the injury report, and it looks like they are getting Jaden Williams is listed as probable. He's been out. So maybe they get healthier on the offensive line. This goes their way. But I don't know. I watched that whole Oklahoma game. I had the under in that one. It feels, and again, this is me using my eyes relative to using numbers or anything, but with injuries and obviously no Trey Harris, it just feels like the foundation's kind of not there, or it's shaky, if that makes sense. They haven't looked in form all SEC play. And it's when do we get to the point where it's maybe this team just isn't as capable as we think, but the defense is quite good. I do wonder if this becomes a similar idea to when Arkansas schemed up a really sharp game plan against Tennessee. Obviously, they were a touchdown more underdogs. They were 2 touchdown underdogs, but I can see Arkansas in that running dog type idea.
Yeah, I played Arkansas that week, and it was close 14, or at least 13.5, 14.
Yeah.
I wish this one was a little higher. It just feels a little bit short to me. I would like to play Arkansas, but I just wish, having gotten 14 against Tennessee, and Tennessee was inflated at that point for sure in retrospect. But I just would want a little more than 7, maybe 7.5, 8, something like that.
100%. Any other games jump out to you on the slate?
I laid the 7 with Memphis yesterday or the day before. So this is my second straight UTSA fade. I think they're in. I thought last week they were in deep shit, and then they come out and take a 35-7 lead. I was like, oh, hey, John, you're an idiot. And the Tulsa offense just out of nowhere. That was bizarre.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I still think, everybody was so high on Memphis early in the season. I was kind of even with the market for the most part, and they're kind of just hanging around. Defense seemingly getting a little better. Offense we know is going to cook pretty much every week. They've kind of taken their foot off the gas, though, when they've been up. Like, they were totally disinterested against Middle Tennessee. There was another game where they didn't do a whole lot, just kind of cruised, autopilot. Fast track in the Dome should theoretically benefit Memphis with how fast that offense is. I don't know. I thought this one should have been more like 10-ish.
Yeah, UTSA has been just god-awful all year long. I mean, really just I don't even know where the good data point really stands. I haven't taken a deep look at this one. Memphis isn't a team I'm particularly kind of keen on. It's a team like I was more Tulane shaded than Memphis shaded before the season. So Memphis hasn't been like a team I'm dying to play. Yeah. But I do agree the number looks a little bit short. I'm closer to like 9.5. I just haven't gotten around to playing it. I mean, it's over a touchdown, so I don't know if there's really a rush to get there, but I could definitely see a Memphis bet on the card. I have a gross one that I haven't played, and I'm still chewing on it. Eastern Michigan, Toledo. Eastern Michigan might be like among the worst, like really, really like dregs of the MAC. But this total got bet up, and I don't know if I agree. My biggest concern is Eastern Michigan's secondary keeping up with Toledo's athletes. Toledo does still have like the better players in the MAC in terms of like at the skill position. That's my concern. But like, man, I don't know. Like, is Eastern Michigan really putting up much? Like, I haven't bet it myself, but like sitting at like 54. If it got to 55, I'd have to play it. But that was one like I was kind of chewing on. Like, I just don't know if I don't know if I trust either offense to really run it up. I guess Toledo, but I don't know.
If you can figure out Toledo, you need to bottle that shit up and put a patent on it because you can make a lot of money. They're just such an enigma every week. And they've been like that for years. They've had so many inexplicable losses. Just when you think they're done, then they come back. You're like, oh, this is the best team in the MAC because they recruit at the highest level of anyone in the league. But yeah, they're so hard to figure out. But I know this is a pretty well-known thing at this point, the Chris Creighton voodoo, that team every year. I've gotten burned plenty of times fading them. Which I hate saying stuff like that because I'm so data inclined that like believing in that kind of thing feels wrong. But there is something to the way he coaches that he keeps them around when they really have no business hanging. So,
yeah, it would be dog or under. I'm kind of chewing on like which one, like where I kind of want to lay it or to take it or something like that. So that's one I'm still kind of thinking about. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk some, round robin candidates, maybe make one, or do you have any other games you wanted to chat?
Looking to see what else I played. Kind of favorite heavy this week. I played WKU tonight. I laid another big number with Iowa State, 13. That one surprised me. It
looks like Morton's going to play, but
yeah,
I don't know if it matters.
So I don't know if that moved at all today. I played 13 last. Yeah, it's like 13 and a half.
Yeah.
But man, what a difficult matchup for Tech. Like, I still have had to kind of retrain my brain. Like this Iowa State offense is not the previous Iowa State offense. Like they have some legit punch, two great receivers, explosive quarterback, like such a different team. Off the bye, some of these coaches coming off the bye, as we've seen, is not an advantage at all. It's maybe a disadvantage, but Campbell seems like the kind of coach, and I'm sure there's plenty of data out there on this, but his team should be pretty buttoned up off a bye week. But it's the number one adjusted pass defense in the country for Iowa State, up against a very pass-happy offense. I just can't see Tech keeping up here.
Yeah. Obviously, Morton going to come back, but we'll see how long that lasts. I mean, that guy's been banged up for like 2-3 years now. Yeah. Rocco Beck can really chuck it around the yard. And between Noel and Higgins, like they got some serious dudes over there. I had circled Iowa State team total because Tech plays fast and maybe the back door's open or something, but like similar type idea to you. This is kind of like not a great matchup for Texas Tech, in my opinion, especially off the heartbreaking loss. If you want to lean into that idea.
That's true. Hadn't thought of that. And then this is also the third straight Iowa State home game where they're lined right in this range because it was Baylor, played Baylor,
covered.
Dead wrong. And then UCF, I think, closed around 14, played UCF. And that was correct. But UCF was able to lean on that ground game that, whereas Tech has to throw it. And it just seems
Both
like
of those.
Yeah.
And both of those games, by the way, what was it, 40 something against Baylor and 38 against UCF, something like that. Maybe that's another angle. If this especially blows out towards 14 or something on a late week mover, something or another. Great games. We hit on 10 or some odd games. So I wrote down a few round robins. John, I do every week a 5-team round robin. I've hit a few 3 out of 5s, which make some decent money there. I think I've covered it. Had a few offers, which happens, when you're leaning into the variance here. So I wrote down a few. I actually think this is the toughest crop of them this week in terms of finding some serious ones. I think the market's kind of sussed out on this. So if you want to kick around a few, we could chat them up. We can maybe, if there's one you really like, one you don't like, how do you want to do this? You want to throw one out there?
Yeah, I do a 4-team every week. It's been, I don't know if I have not hit a 3 yet, but I did hit a 4. So once you hit the 4, you're
good.
Free roll for the season or even beyond that. And then most weeks I've hit 0 or 1, but it doesn't even matter. Once you hit the 1, the 4-teamer, you're golden. The one big one, I try and structure them 1 long shot, 2 kind of mid-range, and then 1 cheaper one. My long shot this week, I did circle ULM against Marshall.
Okay. I looked at ULM on the points, but I agree with that as well. Marshall, not a team you want to back as a favorite.
No, and ULM is kind of the thing you want for the big underdog because they're exceptionally slow. They're 119th in situation neutral pace, and then they're 130th in pass rate over expected. So all they're doing is running. They're also number 1 in defensive explosiveness. They're not really giving up big plays, which is great. So if I'm taking a big shot this week, I think that's the one. There's a part of me that says, at some point they're going to look like bad ULM again. Yeah. But I don't think it's going to happen because Vincent is such a good coach, and that staff every week is really impressive. I know last week was tough, but USA can do that sometimes.
Yeah. The longer shot, if we're kind of working our way down from big dog to little dog, the one I had circled, I guess double digit underdog, Houston. I don't like Kansas State at all, man. I don't think Kansas State's very good.
I don't either. Been below market all year, really from preseason on.
Yeah.
Just wondering, because K-State's weakness is certainly in the secondary, and they're still really good against the run. I just don't. Can Houston do enough through the air? That's my only concern. That's going to have to be,
Houston's going to have to get ahead and force, that game will be known within, the first 2 drives each. Within the first, 7 minutes of the game. It's all right, well, Houston's got a shot here, or they're about to get, just pummeled by K-State.
Yeah. And by the way, I was going to say, too, if you say to yourself, okay, there's only one game script here where this could work out, that's fine if you're playing a plus 400 dog. It's probably not going to work out, but at least you have a path, a plausible path.
Another one, we kind of beat around it. Arizona is what, 2-1, 250. Why is UCF favored? I feel every Big 12 week, I played Texas Tech last week, and the same principle, these mid to crappy Big 12 teams are being separated by a huge gap, and they can't be. They're all separated by a field goal or something. So Arizona, I know this season's over for them and they're kind of a disaster, but what are we getting from UCF? I mean, they might start their 4th stringer who hit my over last week as in a 2-minute drill, and thank you. He was my guy of the week. But if he's going to start, we don't think Arizona could play one decent game.
So Arizona, I've been trying to fade them when they're favored, on the other side playing the dog against them. So I haven't really given much thought to them when they're in the dog role. But I think Brett Brennan, and I'd have to check this, when he was at San Jose, I think he had some good numbers ATS as a dog, which makes sense. Play slow, wants to run the ball, which is part of the reason it's been such a bad match with Fafita this year. Plus bringing in Dino Babers. They were kind of fucked from the start.
Yeah.
But catching a TD or close to a TD as opposed to playing it, I could see that.
And also just why, where's this number in reality coming from? UCF, like residual from last week or 2 weeks ago when they got where they looked all right against Iowa State and now they, get blown out by BYU. And that game was dead. That game was over immediately.
Yeah, and the Colorado game a couple weeks ago was over instantly too. That game, I think Colorado scored. It was a 14-0 pretty quickly, and you just knew UCF was done. They just seemed like.
And look, maybe Arizona just rolls over and this is it, but I don't know. That was one I had circled. Any other ones jump out to you?
I mentioned Washington as my little one. If we want to move into this is kind of like a mid-tier. You threw out with Arizona. I'm just going down my list now. Another really cheap one. Two atrocious teams, but is there really any daylight there? Tulsa against UAB?
No, there's no difference between the teams in reality.
What's UAB's home field worth at this point? A point? I don't know.
I have Tulsa win total over, so I'm hoping Kevin Wilson can rally the troops for one more good game here. Two more good games, but I don't really know if why is UAB laying 3? That probably should be inside of 3.
And that's the kind of game where I don't want to play Tulsa, minus 110, but I have no problem playing plus 120.
Yeah, another one for me that kind of stuck out. I don't know if I could stomach it because it could be over immediately, but Troy, I can't believe I'm saying this. I think they may have found something with this third stringer, Chadwell or Caldwell or whatever. But why? So I wanted to play Coastal under their first week out of their bye because they fired their OC, Trickett, I believe was his name.
Yeah.
Tim Beck back to the OC, who I don't rate as a good offensive coordinator, nor do I think he's a good head coach. So they're on the road out of a bye, but what's that mean? You fired your OC in the bye. Are you really drawing it up? And Troy, pretty good effort against Arkansas State, nearly won the game outright. I don't know. They're a 4.5-point home dog. I just Coastal. I think the offense was actually kind of fine. So is it really getting better or can it only get worse? So Troy was another one I had written down as maybe this team is going somewhere, and Coastal, who really knows where that team is at?
Troy has, I have zero opinion on that game, but I do. Troy is a first-year coach. Sometimes, anecdotally, these teams who have a first-year coach, they still kind of care.
Mm-hmm.
There's still some incentive. They're playing for next year. There's still some enthusiasm. It's not stale, and we're just playing out the string. So that could help them a little bit. Yeah, but I will have nothing there. So.
Yeah. Anything else jump out to you?
Only other one that I noted, haven't done anything with, and probably won't do anything with. We were talking earlier about these difficult travel spots, and I've been too dismissive of those. I've looped them into the general spot stuff, but I think there is some validity to the travel and playing a ton of games, and something I will focus on for college basketball, especially with leagues like the Big Ten. All this crazy travel, and I wonder if the market is really, in this case, though, penalizing the bad spot for Stanford, another cross-country trip. I have to rerun my number because it kind of shocked me that I was only at 5.5, 6. But I know the number's around 10. I don't know. This NC State team laying a big number is frightening. So Stanford did win outright at Syracuse earlier this year? Maybe.
Brutal travel. Before the number came out or anything, I was thinking to myself, man, NC State might be ripe to turn it, with CJ Bailey, the freshman quarterback, and maybe at end of the season type thing, as NC State is privy to do. But man, I don't know if I could get there with Stanford because early start time too. So that's 9 a.m. body clock.
Yeah, wow.
That has been an underrated, just going back to another bet, but Washington at Iowa, and you could say Washington at Indiana, 9 a.m. You're not going to catch up by the time the game kicks off. Of course you could figure it out. It's not it is what it is. But that was something when I bet Iowa a few weeks ago against Washington, a minus 120, a cheap money line. I was like, man, how is Washington showing up to this game correct, given all the back and forth they've been dealing with? Excuse me.
It's hard to get a read on Stanford just because same kind of the same with Cal, but I think Stanford's had a lot worse travel wise. But you really can't get a great read on them because they've been so boned by the schedule, and now playing whatever it is, 6-7 straight weeks. So I get why this number is so inflated.
Huge tax.
But there's there's a part of my lizard brain that's like, fuck it. We got Troy Taylor catching 10 points against a bad team. We'll see.
This is where you want to back Stanford, right? As a big underdog. And then in terms of other ones, it's getting tough. You're starting to run out of these big underdogs that can really make like some serious profit.
It's just a thin card this week too. There's like 30 something teams on bye.
Yeah, big bye week, and then also you got 9 weekday games. It starts to cut into the amount of Saturday volume there. But yeah, I think we hit on a handful of good ones there, especially ULM. I think that was a great one in terms of like how they fit the profile as a running live dog that limits explosives. I'm going to end up on Troy. I think we really hit on a few there. So, John, any other notes you want to get out of here before we get out of here, or anything else you want to share for the listeners?
No, the only game we haven't talked about that I played is a weekday game. I did play Tulane Charlotte over 55 for tomorrow.
I agree with that.
That's going to be just an explosives bonanza with some like periods of inactivity too. But man, just explosives everywhere. Yeah,
I agree with 55 key number, obviously, in college football. Tulane has been lighting some of these teams up, and Charlotte, it's been a revolving door at quarterback, and that was part of why I thought maybe team total instead of taking the full game. But I mean, Tulane has shown a propensity to not fuck around, and they'll score 40 themselves. They have no issue doing that. So Tulane, I think Tulane, there's playoff potential for that team. That team's really, really good.
I agree. And they've kind of been overshadowed by the Service Academy buzz, which is such a good, sexy media story. I understand why Tulane's kind of gotten buried beneath that. But yeah, that is a really explosive offense. And a quarterback that is young and talented, seems to be getting better every week. So, but Charlotte, I have not really gotten involved with because the whole, we hit a bunch of random explosives thing I find hard to cap in general. They get stuffed. It's 3rd and 14. They hit a 50-yard play. That to me is really hard to cap. So I haven't really paid attention. I know there's been a bunch of quarterbacks in the mix. But yeah, Tulane should hit you could see some quick 2-3 play drives where they score 60, 70-yard plays.
On the ground with Mekhi Hughes and through the air with Mensa. I mean, this team could really, really go. So, John, appreciate the time coming on a Wednesday late show. Got through a handful of games, talked some round robin, some dogs, so I appreciate it. You can follow him on Twitter at Jon Fendler, betstamp at JAF373. I know you're about to dive into college basketball. You can check out a Substack, Dictate the Pace. I don't know how often you're going to be writing there, but a lot of great nuggets on there that I think are super insightful for both Rec Plus, Pro, whatever you want to call it, bettors. I think everyone can benefit from checking out John's work. So, John, thanks again for the time. You can find my bets on my betstamp at RW33, Twitter at Reed Wallach. The bets from the show are in the Google sheet below. John, appreciate the time, man. Hopefully we can do this again soon.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate you having me on. Let's do it again for hoop season down the road.